Hello and welcome to Writing an Argumentative Essay. This lesson is for our Yorktown Tiger Days, and this is one of the types of essays that students are required to write during standardized test times. It's one of the options. The first thing you want to do with any essay is understand the prompt. And so for the argumentative essay specifically, students are going to be given a passage to read. So students should read the passage first. For this module, an example passage has been placed within the module. So if you haven't looked at it yet, you may want to pause the video now and go back and read Driverless Cars Are Coming. They'll always be fairly short and they won't be difficult to read, so always take the time to read the passage first. After you've read the passage, you should get into the prompt. The prompt is going to relate to the reading passage in some way. Typically, there's a main idea in the passage itself, and so the prompt is going to relate to that main idea, and a prompt is just your essay question. For this specific one, they're going to ask you to take evidence from the prompt to prove a position. And they're trying to see how successful you are in one, stating or taking a position, and two, using given evidence to back up your position. So you don't want to use evidence from necessarily outside of the prompt. You can use some if you have some personal experience, but for the most part, you're proving your point using given evidence by the test creators. So if you are looking at Driverless Cars Are Coming, an example prompt to go along with that passage would be, in the article Driverless Cars Are Coming, the author presents both positive and negative aspects of driverless cars. Using details from the article, create an argument for or against the development of these cars. They also ask that you be sure to include 1. Your position on driverless cars, 2. Appropriate details from the article that support your position, and 3. An introduction, body, and a conclusion to your argumentative essay. And so you have a prompt and you have some points that you're going to need to hit to make sure that you're getting full credit. And you want to get as much of the credit as you can, because why take time to write an essay if you don't plan to get all of, if not most of the points? So let's break down this prompt together. The first step is to take a position, and that was the first bullet point. So when you're looking at this specific prompt, you would want to decide whether or not driverless cars should be developed or should not be developed. You don't want to argue both sides. You want to choose one because it's easier to argue for one, and 2 because the people who grade these do not like you to be sitting on a fence or wishy-washy or not choosing a side. So it's just best to pick one side. So make sure that you take a position and you take a clear position in your essay. The next step is to consider why you're writing and who you are writing for. So that's purpose and audience. You know what you're going to be writing about, but why do I need to write about driverless cars, and who's going to be reading this information? For the most part, and in this essay, for example, your audience is just going to be an academic grader. Sometimes they'll say write to your school, or write to a parent, or write to a friend. In that case, your audience is specific. And so really make sure to read your prompt and make sure that you know who will be reading this essay. You want to think about what your audience may be concerned about and what your audience expects. The biggest thing that your audience expects for this essay is that you've taken a position and you know how to use evidence. So let's think about evidence next. Supporting your position on this type of essay really comes from the passage. So you want to make sure when you're looking through the passage that you think about how to get at your audience, thinking about what's going to seem reasonable to them, and that would be a logical appeal. You want to speak to your readers' minds. You want to make them see that you have rational, reasonable evidence. You want to have some emotional appeals. This wouldn't be a super emotional argument because it's about driverless cars, but people might be concerned that there could be accidents, which would, again, scare drivers or scare people that are in cars. So you do want to make sure that you're thinking about emotional appeals. And then the last thing is ethics, and that's whether or not they trust you as a writer, whether or not they trust your information, and then whether or not this is something that is a good thing to do. Is it a legal, good, trustworthy thing to do? So you want to think about all 3 of those things when you go back to the passage and look for your evidence, because a good essay is going to make sure that you're providing reasonable, sound evidence, that you're providing emotional supports if necessary, and they want to trust the writer, and so you need to be a trustworthy writer. As you're gathering your evidence, you'll more than likely gather facts, will be your number one type of evidence. You may have some examples, and in the driverless car essay, they have specific car makers, so you may have examples or specific times where these cars have been made or tried out. They do include expert opinions. Typically that will be in a quotation, and so you do have those throughout the essay. Sometimes there'll be an analogy that tries to make sense of it by coming up with a comparison. That may not be your strongest type of evidence, but it's definitely used. Case studies, if you're looking at something more scientific, you'll see more data-driven type of information. And then anecdotes, when there's a personal story within the passage. And again, they kind of go in the order in which you'll see them most. So facts would be the one you see most often, all the way down to anecdotes, which are probably used the least, but they're definitely important. So if you're looking at getting your evidence together, it's typically a good idea to have at least 3 good supporting pieces from your passage that support your position. So if my position is driverless cars should not be developed, my reasons would be because driverless cars still require a driver, which the passage makes clear a number of times. It's not technically driverless. It still needs someone in there just in case there's an emergency. Humans can be distracted in a driverless car and forget to pay attention to the road. So that is another thing that's brought up a couple of times, and that would maybe scare your audience. And then driving without a human driver is considered illegal in most states. So again, that's an ethical appeal because I wouldn't necessarily want to be pushing something that's not considered, 1, safe, which is emotional, but 2, within the ethical boundaries of what we expect out of drivers. So we would need to change a lot of these things to make sure that driverless cars should be started in development. So again, that would be my position for this essay, although driverless cars sound really cool. Once you have your position, you have your evidence, you're ready to organize your essay. The way you organize your essay is important to its effectiveness. There's not really a rule in how you have to stagger your evidence. Some people like to put their strongest piece of evidence first and then work through the essay. Some people like to use maybe their smaller, medium, and biggest piece of essay evidence last because it leaves the audience with a strong impression. Whichever you prefer is fine. There, again, isn't a right or wrong order for how you should present your ideas, but make sure you have a plan as you go in because you do want to have strong transitions between each point. And so if one point connects to another in a more telling fashion, then you should probably make sure to order them in that way. And then you need to make sure, just as the prompt asks you, to have an intro, a body, and a conclusion. Your introduction should get your audience's attention, right away. You may want to ask a question. You may want to tell a short story, in this case about a driverless car, or you may want to give them a statistic. If there was a statistic in the passage, you could use that. You want to make sure to give some background information on the prompt itself. So again, maybe just tell them about driverless cars, how long they've been in development, why they are an issue, and then you'd want to take your position. So you're probably looking at somewhere between 5 and 7 sentences in that introduction to really make sure you're getting enough information out there to your audience. Next, you'll have your body. Typically, you're going to have probably 3 paragraphs in this body part. You may have 2, but if you're really going over 3 reasons that people should support your position, it really needs to give each reason its own paragraph. So really think about that. You also want to make sure you're transitioning in a really strong way between each point. So make sure at the beginning of your paragraph or between each of your pieces of evidence, you're making sure to transition, and then you're giving a commentary or a reason that each piece of evidence is important. So you should have the passage in your essay, but you also want to make sure there's some of you explaining why this is such an important thing and why the evidence is important evidence. So you want to have a good balance of evidence plus your own commentary. So you are still the writer. And then you'll end with a conclusion paragraph, which means we're looking at somewhere between 4 and 5 paragraphs to get this essay done. for the conclusion, you want to make sure that you bring up your point, try to rephrase it, not just repeat it, and then summarize the reasons for your option if you like. You don't have to do that, but you can. And you should let the readers know what they should do next or how they can help change the situation. For instance, if you think that driverless cars might be something in the future, you could let them know that maybe that they should be working with lawmakers to think about how we can make this something legally possible. You could let them know they could also work on making sure that the roads and just the way that people drive on the roads, those things may need to be changed, which again, it's an expensive undertaking. So it's going to need to be something that would be a huge change. And again, the cost is one of the things that's really held back driverless cars. So you could maybe mention cost being one of the biggest holdbacks in this whole situation. All right, so for the last thing, it's understanding the rubric. And I'm going to end the video now, and you should go ahead and go back into the module and take a look at the writing rubric. You've gone over it in other modules before this, and so I want you just to have a refresher of what it means to write an awesome essay. We want to make sure you're getting as many of those points as you can. And just remember, the prompt normally tells you exactly what it's looking for. So use the prompt as a checklist to make sure that you have taken a position, provided evidence, and that you have included an intro, body, and conclusion. After you look at the rubric, you'll continue through the module, and then you should be done with argumentative review.